Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me once again is Charles Lipson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Chicago. Charles, thanks for coming on.
Hi, Brittany. I always love talking with you, and it seems like even if we skip just 2 or 3 days, the world changes.
The world changes because you and I last spoke less than a week ago, and boy, oh boy, did the election change since then. So as our viewers know, on Sunday, President Biden did drop a statement saying, "I'm out of the race." He then endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. Since then, she has become the likely Democratic nominee, and President Biden on Wednesday night delivered an Oval Office address saying why he's out of the race. Somewhat, you called it he was delivering a eulogy. Let's talk about the address. What did you think?
It was a eulogy for his own political career, which is a long one, and for his proponents, a distinguished one, for his opponents, less so. But I think that he left open a number of questions. He needed to do several things in the speech. I thought that the thing that he did most effectively was to say, "I'm really passing the baton to Kamala Harris, and I'm doing it without any reservations. She'll be a great president." I thought that the idea that he's passing the baton to a new generation, a ringing phrase from JFK's inaugural address, and something that Karine Jean-Pierre in the press conferences since then has just reiterated, doesn't explain what changed. It was a new generation a year ago. It was a new generation a week ago. What changed over the weekend? And we really haven't had much reporting about what sticks and carrots were used. We know that the key mover was really Nancy Pelosi and maybe secondarily Barack Obama. But we'd like to know kind of what went on. But the race has moved on. And what struck me was a couple of things. One was how quickly the Democrats coalesced around Harris. I think thinking that they would blow up their coalition if they didn't. And the other is how quickly the news media, which really for 2 years at least has been covering up on Joe Biden's decline and not doing their basic journalistic duty, has now just jumped completely on board. I mean, it was a complete 180. And I think that they haven't really recognized how much public trust they've lost.
And there was this sense of a coronation around Vice President Kamala Harris because after Biden did endorse her, the endorsements did come in, notably not from former President Obama. As you and I sit here, reportedly that is coming soon. But what do you think of her as the nominee now?
Well, a couple of points. The first is that now in 2020 and in 2024, she has not received a single vote by an actual voter to be the party's presidential nominee. She dropped out before Iowa last time, and she was number 2 this time. So it's kind of hard for the Democrats to run on the "we're preserving democracy" when you have a backrooms choice of candidate. I think they do have an argument about Trump's failure to acknowledge the last election. I think that was a serious matter. I've criticized it many times. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat that, but I am saying that this diminishes it. I think that Harris has three fundamental problems. One is she's unlikable. She's unlikable in the same sense that Hillary Clinton was. Donald Trump is, people just drop into one of two camps. They either like him or they dislike him. So that's one problem. Second problem is that Harris is tied to Joe Biden's record, and it's a record that is not very popular. I mean, it's not just, I don't think people dislike Joe Biden personally. So his ratings, which are the lowest in the history of polling for any president, and hers were about the same, were all really a reflection of people's dissatisfaction with policy. Joe ran as a unifier and somebody who would sort of run from the center left, and he's run very progressively. The third problem that Harris has is that her own policy advocacies, and we have a lot of them on tape, are closer to Bernie Sanders than they are to the middle of the party or to the middle of the electorate. And I think it's a mistake for the Republicans to emphasize, oh, she doesn't have children, or there's, personal attacks. I hate them anyway. But I think it's a political mistake. They should run on policy differences.
Let's take that last part first. Her being a more left politician, do you think then that makes her vice presidential pick all the more important here? Because traditionally they don't matter as much, but now she only has just a few months left until Election Day. So how important is her running mate pick?
You're correct that they almost never matter. The last one that was thought to really matter was Lyndon Johnson, who helped carry Texas because he had deep political machine there. I would say that the picking of a candidate who had mental health problems in an earlier Democratic race was also a problem. But for the most part, they don't. And I think people are saying, look, it'll probably be a senator or a governor, probably from a swing state, with people thinking that Mark Kelly might be in the lead position, but also Josh Shapiro. I think people should recognize that there are a lot of people who say, well, the Democrats can't pick Josh Shapiro because he's Jewish. That is one of the most disturbing things I've heard in modern politics, frankly.
I mean, I hear you. I agree with you wholeheartedly there. So do you think she should pick him? I mean, why is that such a concern?
Well, the reason that she would want to pick him is twofold. He's kind of more to the center. He's progressive, but he's more to the center than she is. Frankly, almost everybody is. And the other reason is that he comes from a state that she really needs to win, which is Pennsylvania, and he has a sort of deep political ties there. She also needs to win Arizona, and Mark Kelly would be helpful there. So, it's just hard to know in their discussion about the governor of North Carolina and so on. I actually thought that Trump would have been better off picking Youngkin. I thought that he would have been a stronger pick, but I can see why he picked J.D. Vance, and I wrote the reasons were largely because I think he wants to solidify the MAGA movement for 2028 and beyond. Remember, he will be a lame duck if he's elected on the day he's elected. So he needs to be thinking about the future, and I think that's the reason. But I just don't think that the vice president will matter all that much in terms of the voting population.
I want to get back to your point about how Republicans should criticize Kamala Harris based on policy and not identity. Aside from age and mental acuity, I mean, she was Biden's number 2. So did she inherit the problems that President Biden had in this election, like the border, like the economy, like inflation? And how does she separate herself from those?
She can't. And one more. You listed the big ones, and I would add energy, which is a big issue in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've seen the ad that the aspirant for Senator Casey's seat, whose name is Dave McCormick, is running, but it can run in almost every state. It does emphasize energy, but it's just filled. It's almost entirely clips of Kamala Harris stating her policy positions. She doesn't want fracking. She wants the whole Green New Deal. She would shut down a lot of energy production. Uh, by the way, I don't think that's just a problem in Pennsylvania. I think it's an even bigger problem in Michigan. These automobile companies have lost fortunes on EVs. And while everybody has been talking about the importance of the Muslim vote, Muslim American vote in Dearborn and elsewhere in Michigan, there are a lot of auto workers there too. And I just filled up my car today in Chicago, and it was almost $5 a gallon. It's not like we're getting good public services for that. It's not like the streets aren't filled with potholes and the like. So I think people are concerned with the energy policies. I think people would like to see, people are concerned with global warming, people are concerned with environmental change. And I think, I'm not trying to sweep that aside, but I do think that people are concerned with everyday issues like how much are they paying to heat their home in the winter, how much are they paying for their daily commute, and all the rest.
We've gotten a glimpse into how Vice President Kamala Harris is running this campaign. She's only been the likely nominee for just a few days now, but she's pitting herself against Donald Trump as the prosecutor versus the felon. She said, I know Donald Trump's type. That is her strategy going forward. What do you make of that take?
It's an interesting one because, of course, she was sharply criticized by a lot of African Americans in particular for being a very aggressive, tough prosecutor. But then as soon as she moved into national politics, she began to raise money for bail for Black Lives Matter protesters who've been arrested for various criminal acts and all the rest. I think that in general, Brittany, I think that the lawfare has hurt the Democrats. I think it's perceived as mobilizing the entire judicial system against a political opponent. And the 34 felony counts on which Trump was convicted are rather like, first of all, they strung together two misdemeanors and a felony, all of which the statute of limitations had run out on. But the 34 counts were like if you had shoplifted a bag of groceries and it had 34 candy bars, instead of charging you with one count of shoplifting, they charge you with 34 counts for 34 candy bars. So it was all ginned up. And then almost all these prosecutions have fallen apart. I'm almost certain that the case in New York, which was a political case from top to bottom, will eventually be overturned. But they don't care about that. They want to get it through the election, calling Trump a felon. I think that it's I don't know if it's a political mistake for her to do it. I assume that Kamala Harris doesn't do anything that hadn't been poll tested and focus group tested and all the rest. But what it suggests to me is how few issues they have to run on. They can't run on immigration. She's trying to squirm out from her role as the border czar. They can't run on inflation. What they can really run on is January 6th and abortion. That's their two issues. And now they're trying to add, and Trump is a criminal.
Let's talk about her campaign.
And one more thing. I'm sorry. One more thing. They're trying to say democracy is endangered. But they may be right about the threats to democracy, but they come from both sides. You have the Democrats who have tried very hard to expand the Supreme Court or to change the Supreme Court so they can get the rulings they want. They want to blow up the Senate's traditional rules. They've just changed an enormous number of basic rules of our democracy to help themselves. And in that sense, they've also threatened democracy But still, I would say that that's an issue on which they're going to try to run. I just don't think it's nearly as important to people as kitchen table.
Now that President Biden dropped out, a lot of Republicans have said this is rich coming from the party who claims to care about democracy, that no one voted for Vice President Kamala Harris in this primary, and now she'll probably be the nominee. Democrats have fought back and have said that a vote for Biden was a vote for Harris because they're on the ticket A, and B, polling suggests by an overwhelming majority, Democratic voters wanted Biden to step aside. What do you make of that argument?
There's something to it. That is, I think many voters, many Democratic voters, didn't think that Joe Biden would last for another 4 years if he were reelected. But it is also sort of sleight of hand, isn't it? Nobody who's voting for Trump is really casting their vote for J.D. Vance. I mean, they recognize that the vice president could take the lead position if there's a heart attack or stroke or some other event, but it's just rich and misleading, and deliberately so, to say they were voting for Harris to begin with. What this was a backroom coup, and it's not unlike the way that politics used to run in the 1920s when people would sit in a smoke-filled room. Now the only difference is that they don't allow smoke.
I want to talk about her campaign now because I was talking to a strategist and he said that it feels like the past few days have definitely been a honeymoon phase for Vice President Kamala Harris. But if we remember back to her 2020 run, I mean, she didn't make it to 2020. She dropped out before Iowa. That campaign fell flat. She failed to find her groove there. Now she has less than 4 months out from the election. She has seen historic fundraising numbers in recent days. She's been embraced by Gen Z on social media. So do you anticipate that she keeps this momentum up until November?
No, but I do think she's a better candidate than she was last time. She's more experienced. She hasn't made as many mistakes. But her word salad speeches, her sense that she was looking down on people, the fact that nobody is willing to work for her for more than about a year, they quit. I think that the public, for the most part, doesn't have a very positive view of her. But again, I think that the problem that she will have, beyond the people don't like her as they didn't like Hillary, is really a policy problem. Yes, there's a honeymoon. Look at how quickly the honeymoon ended after the spurt of support for Donald Trump after the assassination attempt. It faded very, very quickly. It scared us all, for sure, and it may have made some people think that they want to support him. But for the most part, these things fade. My guess, and it's only a guess, is that she will peak from now through the convention and then fade after that. And I think that the crucial issue for Republicans is to define her before she can define herself.
And you've said in this conversation, define her based on policy alone is their most effective strategy. Is that what you think?
Yes, I think that she should be tied to all the failures of the Biden administration, and particularly immigration and the economic failures, and then on top of that, the fact that she is really a democratic socialist, and that her voting record in Congress, this isn't made up, and she was proud of it, that she was the most left-wing member of the Senate. Her record is much closer to a Bernie Sanders than to a kind of middle-of-the-road Democrat. The Democratic Party has substantially shifted over the past decade or two, really since Obama. And the Republican Party has shifted since Trump. And it's not simply a left-right shift. Under Trump, you have the Republicans becoming a working class party. And what I've noticed among the Democrats, and this is certainly true of both Biden and Harris, is that they're running against the party of George H.W. Bush, a country club rich guy's party. And I don't think that that's the current party. Every quintile in the American electorate did better economically under Trump. They don't think that he's trying to hand away money to rich people at the expense of the poor. So I think that they've got to come up with something better. And I think that the Democrats are also vulnerable on education. Education is in real disrepute, and the role of colleges has been a real problem there. And I think that will also hurt Kamala. And finally, Democrats are the party of government. And government hasn't looked very good for the last several years. They couldn't protect the president from an assassination attempt. The CDC mishandled COVID and then lied to us about it. The FBI has made repeated errors. We saw the 51 former intelligence agents claim everything was a Russian hoax. So the government hasn't looked good. That hurts the party in power, and it especially hurts Democrats because they're the party of government.
So there are still some undecideds, still some independents up for grabs in this election. How does Vice President Harris persuade them to vote for her?
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of the persuasion. First of all, she'll have to get out and do retail campaigning in these key battleground states. Second thing is, I think the Democrats have a very good ground game. They will really get voters out, but I think they're vulnerable among black voters who. I mean, the more that the Democrats emphasize that she would be the first black woman president, the first woman president, and so forth, the more they run an identity politics campaign, they might appeal to well-educated women in the suburbs. But I don't think that resonates with a lot of voters anymore. I think voters are concerned about their economic well-being. I think they're concerned about safety. They're concerned about an open border. They're concerned about international wars. And I think that Kamala Harris has to be able to answer those kinds of questions. And frankly, I don't know what her answer will be, and I don't think she probably knows yet how to do it. Of course, she'll emphasize other issues, but if she can't come up with good answers on those absolute kitchen table issues, I think she'll have a real problem. And in fact, I think she is the underdog in the race, regardless of her recent bump. I think that she will have a hard go. Trump's problem is showing some restraint. He's already won the Republican Party. He doesn't have to go over the top all the time, but he does.
Charles, I want to end the conversation where it began, and it's on President Biden. I know last night you said that Oval Office address was his eulogy, but I'm curious what his legacy is going to be, because since the presidential debate until now, we've seen a lot. We've seen people, Democrats, initially stand by President Biden. We saw the calls for him to step down grow louder and louder. We saw him seemingly and reportedly forced out the door by his own party. And then once he stepped down, he is getting somewhat of a hero's exit. Everyone thanking him, and by everyone I mean Democrats, thanking him for his service in politics the past decades. What do you think his legacy is going to be?
I'm reminded of all those presidents whose names we can't remember between Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt. They're just these anonymous figures who kind of were placeholders for the most part. And I don't think he had much of an impact. I think people will remember Barack Obama for two things. They'll remember him for being the first black president, and they'll remember him for putting the final capstone piece in the FDR program of a kind of full welfare state, because Barack Obama really thanks to John McCain, got Obamacare passed. So now we have health insurance. By the way, Kamala Harris is on record not only for letting the border be open, but saying that we should provide the same health care to all illegals who come in the country. We should provide the ACA health care to all those people. Now, she'll either have to back off of her previous position and explain why or whatever. But I think, going back to your Biden question, I think Biden will be viewed as a kind of placeholder for 4 years who didn't succeed very much. And I think part of his legacy will depend upon some of the criminal trials that are related to the corruption. We don't know how his family got rich, except that we know that they got rich because of their association with a high Democratic policy maker, and that that a lot of money came into the family through that. Now, he may not be convicted, but it doesn't smell good.
And do you think that his legacy is really dependent also if Vice President Kamala Harris is elected, he'll have more of a glossy, shiny legacy if she is, and then will be blamed if Trump gets elected? Do you think that's how history will look upon him?
That's an excellent point, Brittany. If he can successfully pass the torch, that's one thing. If he fails, there'll be an interesting question about whether the Democratic Party is well served by figures like Kamala Harris, or take Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom has done the near impossible, turned the gorgeous, wonderful state of California into a kind of sinkhole. It's almost impossible to mess those things up, but they've done it, and they've done it with these very progressive policies. So the Democratic Party, if they lose, will have to figure out whether they want to try to move back to the center. And one of the problems with moving back to the center is what's called adverse selection. That is, the only people who are left standing after an unsuccessful election like that are people from the most liberal states holding the most liberal positions. But I do think your basic point is absolutely right. If hands off the presidency to a successor, that's very good news for him. If he fails to hand it off to a successor, and a large part of the reason that she fails is because of his policies, then of course that's going to hurt his reputation historically.
Charles, per usual, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining.
I always enjoy it, Brittany.